Okay, hello and welcome to today's video. So today I have what I personally consider to be evidence for both the presence of dungeons and how said dungeons will work in the sequel to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. So stick with me through today's video as I'll be going over the evidence as to why I think there might be dungeons, and then also speculating on what this may mean for dungeons in general within the game. Right, so before going into this theory, you probably want to have a good general understanding of the Zonai tribe. If you don't, you can always go look it up or watch other videos on it for a more in-depth description, but well, to provide a quick summary for those who don't know, the Zonai tribe is an ancient barbaric tribe of magic users that disappeared thousands of years ago. They're the people behind building a lot of the ruins found throughout Hyrule, most notably the Lome Labyrinths, the Dark Typhlo ruins, and the ancient citadel in the Zonai ruins themselves in Faron. There are many great videos on this tribe by other people on the internet going over a ton of different things, but today we're going to be focusing mostly on the architectural style of this tribe. All of their structures are built in this same style, with spiralling emblems which represent the tribe, and also animals used a lot. In the trailer for the sequel, you can very clearly see that the underground location that Link and Zelda are in is of Zonai construction. It looks almost identical in the architecture. We can also see the entrance to what looks to be a large Zonai building for a brief second later on in the trailer. Myself and many others believe this building to be a dungeon, but so far there's been no evidence as to why this might be a dungeon. However, with what I'm going to be talking about today, there might be now. Okay, so we know the Zonai and their ruins are going to play a larger role in Breath of the Wild 2, but what exactly, you may be asking? Well, I'm going to ask you to put all of that to the side for a second, and just watch this short clip.
This looks a bit suspicious. We must be near a dungeon.
In places like this,
I knew
you
it.
tend to run into these guys.
That clip I just showed you was of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, way back in 2014, back when it was simply known as Zelda Wii U. There might not seem to be anything of much value here at first, however if you pay attention to what they're saying, they say, "This looks a bit suspicious, we must be near a dungeon." They say this when riding up to a pair of two Zonai statues. Now, I can only think of one implication from this. Back then, in 2014, they used Zonai statues as a way to signify to the player, oh, there's a dungeon somewhere, you're near it. I can only think of one result of this, that back in the day, they used Zonai ruins and statues to help guide players toward dungeons in the game. So you may see where I'm going with this, and perhaps suggest the idea that the dungeon they could have been referring to could have just been a shrine or a divine beast. However, I don't personally believe this. Although we do see some shrines, well not divine beasts, but shrines, in Zonai ruins in the final game, we also see plenty of Zonai ruins without shrines, and we see shrines in places that aren't Zonai ruins. And then there is the divine beasts which just aren't in Zonai ruins at all, so obviously, there isn't necessarily a correlation between the two, simply they are built there sometimes. So I wouldn't consider that to line up with the quote. As a result of this, I personally believe that when he says the word dungeon, he's referring to an actual dungeon, and not just a shrine or a divine beast. Perhaps at this time they hadn't decided upon what the dungeons would even be yet, and they just knew they wanted one there. I don't know, but there was probably a dungeon there, not a shrine. However, they later decided, oh, shrines and divine beasts are the way we're going. Because obviously, 2014 was very early on in development. They were still working on the game's engine and had not got it anywhere near finishing, and I mean, they said it was releasing in 2015, but we all know what happened to that, right, don't we? 2017, for those of you who don't know, but you probably all do. Anyway though, even if we know that there are going to be dungeons in Breath of the Wild, near Zonai structures, originally anyway, how does that help us now? Well, I'm thinking that perhaps they're recycling that said idea into Breath of the Wild 2. One fact that helps back this up quite a bit is the fact that the Zelda team have been known to recycle unused dungeon ideas from one Zelda game to another. So recycling ideas from Breath of the Wild to Breath of the Wild 2, both of which will presumably be using the same engine, could be especially easy for them to do. Now cast your mind back to what I talked about earlier on in the video, in relation to the Zonai tribe and the sequel to Breath of the Wild. Another point that could back up this idea about the dungeons is the clear presence of Zonai architecture in the sequel, especially with what looks like a potential Zonai dungeon being shown at one point. This would all make perfect sense if the team had indeed recycled a past idea of Zonai dungeons from Breath of the Wild 1 into Breath of the Wild 2. Now, whether or not you personally agree with this idea of mine, and feel that evidence is strong enough or not strong enough, is honestly down to you. I get that there's not that much evidence as desired, and there could even potentially be problems I've not found, but I feel it's a reasonably strong theory to look into. But regardless of all of that, the next part is going to be pure speculation, based on if my said theory is true, so take what I just said with a grain of salt, and take all of this with even less than a grain of salt, like, I don't know, an atom of salt, if that's even possible. Right, so if they are indeed recycling this past idea about dungeons into Breath of the Wild 2, then we will no doubt be seeing a variety of zonai structures and statues across the world, indicating that a dungeon could be nearby. We also know that Nintendo plan on basing this in the same world as Breath of the Wild, as Aonuma said so in an interview. So if we are indeed in the same Hyrule as Breath of the Wild, then it wouldn't be a stretch to say that the existing zonai ruins could function as indications of nearby dungeons, with said nearby dungeons having possibly come up out of the ground, along with whatever Hyrule Castle was doing at the end of the trailer. If this is the case, then you could expect the following areas to have dungeons in them, as they already have the presence of zonai ruins at them. Of course, just because it's in the same world, we don't know that said world is going to be identical. They could easily change up the world a ton by putting it a bit further into the future, or even back in the past with time travel. In the past, the zonai might no longer be ruins, but rather full-on structures, perhaps even constituting full dungeons. However, in the future, the ruins could have been dug up, allowing for potentially more dungeons, or rather than being dug up, they could rise up out of the ground, like we saw with the castle. I feel that if we're basing it off the idea Nintendo might have originally had for Breath of the Wild, then I think it'll be in the future, not the past, because presumably the structures will still be ruined then. However, just because they were ruined in the original idea, doesn't mean they have to be now. But, you know, that's just a thing. So anyway, if we are potentially having zonai structures marking dungeons, this brings another potential idea to the table. What if all of the dungeons are zonai based? Now, I know everyone, myself included, is wanting fresh and varied dungeons rather than the repetitive nature of the shrines in Breath of the Wild, but just because we want it, it doesn't mean we're going to get it. I mean, we have zero indication of that. I feel that we could possibly be getting what they did with the Sheikah Shrines and Divine Beasts again, but this time zonai themed instead of Sheikah themed. This could make sense because it would allow them to save greatly on development time by just using the same zonai assets over and over again, and it would also make sense with this theory, if it does indeed happen, because having zonai ruins marking nearby dungeons would make sense if those nearby dungeons were zonai ones, you know? I mean, personally, although I would like varied dungeons thematically, to be honest, as long as we get real dungeons back in terms of the gameplay and content within them, I'll be more than happy myself. And I mean, to be fair, I feel that the zonai dungeons could be more varied than the shrines were anyway. As in, they're not just strong walls which are unbreakable and all look the same. They're stone walls which could easily crumble away, allowing for stuff like lava, water, plant overgrowth, or even a dark fog like we saw in the Typhlo ruins in Breath of the Wild, which, obviously, all of those basic examples would already go miles to distinguish each of the dungeons from the others, you know, but then they could go even further too. Regardless of any of those ideas though, this video has been going on for quite a while now, and as much as I do enjoy talking about this, I've got to get the editing done as well. But before you go, I would be interested in hearing what your thoughts on this are. Do you agree with my theory based on the quote? Do you even agree with any of my speculation? Or not? It would be great to hear, so please do make sure to let me know in the comments down below. And if you did enjoy this video, I'd also greatly appreciate if you like and subscribe, it really helps the channel. But regardless of any of that, I'll see you all in the next one. Bye. Oh wait, also, before I go, there's only 1 week left on my 20% off on the channel merch, the launch deal. The code is BotW, all caps. Use that if you want 20% off, but bye for real this time.